Hey, 10 o'clock. How are you guys? Good. I'm doing well as well. Thanks for asking. All right, enough small talk. Let's get down to business. That's how I start all coffee conversations with people. Enough small talk. Let's just get down to business. That's a joke, 10 o'clock. Man, welcome if you're here for the first time. This is not going well so far. Okay, I'll start. Do the video again. Just kidding. For most of human life, for most human civilizations that have ever existed, see, I'm serious. We're just going to dive right in. You found, didn't matter where you were born, it didn't matter when you were born, you found your sense of identity. This is true whether you're Christian or not, religious background. Your sense of self-worth, your sense of significance, your identity, it came through what you would pursue is what would be described best as the concept of honor. Not to confuse or lose anybody up front, but honor, the honor system, which obviously many cultures in our world today still operate according to honor principles, is when some external force has assigned to you a role and said your value in our society, in our family, is based on how well you perform your particular role. That's what determines your value. And so for most of human civilization, that was the game. That's what you would pursue. You wanted honor. This might be in terms of your family. You got a role. You're a son. You're a daughter. You bring honor to the family name. It's in terms of your society. You had a civic responsibility. You had a sense of duty as a citizen of that particular tribe, that particular culture. You honor the society. And that's for most of life, that's how people have gained a sense of identity. There's a shadow side to that culture, shame. If you dishonor the family, if you dishonor the society, if you don't fulfill your assigned role, often you can be ostracized, you'd be shamed for that. But that's life for most of human civilization. The Western world, the world that you've been born into, certainly in America, does not operate according to honor principles. And many sociologists have written about this. If you're interested in stuff like that, you're probably not, because you're probably not a preacher and you don't have as much free time as I do, okay? But I only work one day a week, okay? So there's a shift that has occurred in our life. There's a shift that has occurred in our society, and the shift, as Peter Berger describes this in his book, The Homeless Mind, that we have gone from being a society, or our culture is no longer interested in trying to achieve some level of honor. That's really an obsolete concept in our world. What we are now interested in our culture is the concept of dignity. So currently, how you would achieve a sense of identity, self-worth, is through dignity. It's a dignity culture. In fact, we would look at society that says you got to perform a specific role and that's your job. We would look at that and we would say that's dehumanizing if that's how you have to gain value. What we pursue is dignity, and dignity is not something that somebody gives to you. Dignity is something you earn. And so consequently, the success culture that we live in, the pressure cooker that you live in every single day, that's competitive, you need to win, that sense I need to accomplish something, it's because every single day of your life that you've existed in this world, you don't feel like your honor is at stake, you feel like your dignity is at stake, and it's something that you have to achieve. And you probably don't go through life feeling like, I don't want to let my parents down, I don't want to let my society down. You probably go through life with a sense, I don't want to let myself down. If you're anything like me, you're probably your own worst critic, aren't you? There's that constant pressure. And that's a fairly new cultural moment where dignity is constantly at stake, where you have become your own worst critic, where it feels like it's constantly hanging in the balance with what you do, what your status is, how much money you make. That's our society. There's a shadow side to that world. It certainly had an enormous impact on our mental health. The anxiety age is what we now describe it as, that constant humming beneath the surface in your life. Am I doing enough? Am I dignified enough? Am I successful enough? It's had an enormous impact on our mental health. It certainly had an enormous impact on our family life. David Brooks, in his book Paradise Road, writes about how there has been a professionalization of childhood. Have you been on the sideline of a Little League soccer game lately? that constant drive for success, that constant, he describes in his book that the moment you were born into what he calls an achievatron, that constant sense you have to perform, you have to do something. And in honor societies where families used to be sort of a safe haven from a heartless world, they have now transitioned to be places that appetite for success, that desire to be a dignified person is nurtured and it's fed from a very, very early age. Now, the reason I tell you all that, some of you are going, this is going to be a long, weird sermon. The reason I tell you all that is because for most of life, most of human civilizations, you would pursue honor. That was the goal. For most of our society in the Western world, you pursue dignity. That's the goal. And in the scriptures, Jesus is going to give us a different metric altogether of faithfulness of what we should pursue with what's been entrusted to us. If you have a Bible, you can open it with me to Luke chapter 19. How we doing, 10 o'clock? We're doing well so far. Half of you, good. The other half of you, you're a lost cause. I don't know. Luke chapter 19. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screens, which is, I don't even know why I say if you have your Bible, because most everyone just reads on the screen, which is perfectly fine. Or you can follow along on your iPad, phone, Google Glass, pick your poison. Anybody have a Google Glass? Just curious. Anybody remember Google Glass? Google, if you're listening, that's not good for you. You probably are, Google. You probably are listening somewhere. My bank accounts all just got erased with that one joke. Your Google Maps are going to direct you to a different church next Sunday. Lay off the Google jokes, Jared. Telling you. All right. All right, Luke chapter 19, verse 11. You can follow along with Siri if you choose. Anybody bring Alexa in with you today? I'm not talking about your daughter named Alexa. I'm just, golly, this sermon is not going well. Luke 19, verse 11. While they were listening to this, Jesus is going to give this metric of faithfulness. While they were listening to this, he went on to tell them a parable. Now, Jesus would often do this. He would describe these fictitious stories to make a point about his kingdom. There was a lot of controversy, a lot of questions around what is Jesus' kingdom like? He kept saying, I'm a king, I'm going to bring a kingdom, but nobody really understood what it meant. Did it have political implications? Especially in that day, it was confusing. And Jesus goes on, and it says, he's getting near to Jerusalem, and the people thought that the kingdom of God was going to appear at once. He said, a man of noble birth went to a distant country. So he describes this fictitious story. A man went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and he gave them 10 minas, which is it's a unit of wealth. It would be the equivalent of around $20 or so today. But in this day, this would be 3 or 6 months' wages because it's an agricultural peasant culture. So it's a significant amount of money to the people that are hearing this. He called 10 of his servants and he gave them 10 minas. Put this money to work, he said, until I come back. So I will return, the master says. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation ahead of him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. Now, you and I read this and we go, this is kind of an odd story, but culturally it has, there's a precedent for it. There's some context to it. It was quite common that when someone wanted to become the king of any particular region, they would have to travel to in this case, it would be Rome, the headquarters of the world, and they would have to ask to be appointed king of Israel or whatever the territory was. In the world of Jesus, Herod, if you remember him from the Christmas story, King Herod had gone around the year 40 BC to Rome and he'd asked to be appointed king of Israel, and people hated Herod. They didn't want him to be king, but Rome appoints him to be king over all of Israel. After Herod dies around the year 4 BC, his son Archelaus goes to Rome. People hated him. Rome appoints him to be king, and so there's some context. Jesus isn't just pulling this out of thin air. There's some context that people would sort of understand for the story that he's going to tell. Now, he goes on and says the king comes back, and he's given the 10 minas, he's given the units of money to these individuals, and he says, what did you do with it? That's essentially his question. Verse 15, he was made king, however, and he returned home. which would be against the people's wishes. Then he sent the servants to whom he had given the money in order to find out what they had gained with it. So the servant returns. And if you read the story kind of fast, you lose some of the context. The servants were essentially asked by this king to do business in the name of a king in what would be a hostile environment for them to conduct business. They would not be, this would not be something they would want to do because the kings essentially said, hey, I'm testing your allegiance to me. I'm not a very liked king, but I want you to do business in my neighborhood, in my backyard, and make sure that everybody knows that you pledge allegiance to me. It's a hostile environment. The best way I can think to describe this, imagine for a moment if Dean Spanos, owner of the Los Angeles Chargers, okay, there you go. See, that's my point. Hostile. Imagine if Dean Spanos came to you and he said, I'm going to go to Los Angeles for a little while, but I'm going to return. We pray. And imagine he said to you, I'm going to give you some money. I'm going to hand you some minas, and I want you to conduct business in my name while I'm gone. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to go all over San Diego, and I want you to set up Dean Spanos car dealerships, okay? And I want you to put on the marquee, Dean Spanos Chevrolet. I want you to put on this marquee, Dean Spanos Ferrari. I want you to put on this marquee, Dean Spanos Honda. And I want you to do business in my name. Now, if you were an intelligent person, you would go, excuse me, Mr. Spanos, I notice a design flaw in the business model. Your name is not going to gain us a lot of extra business in San Diego. And if he said, it doesn't matter, that's not the point. I want to test your allegiance to me. I'm just asking, are you going to be willing to do this? You would probably say, well, let's just change it to Dean's Auto. I mean, let's just do, this is essentially what this king's interest is. The Greek word that's used here, when he talks about when he returns and says how much business was gained, or how much to find out what they had gained with it. The Greek word is the only time this word's used in the entire Bible, but the Greek word is, let's all say that together. Diagrammatiamai. I'm going to try it once, okay? But it's this concept, which essentially means how much business was transacted. That's probably a better translation of it. Not necessarily how profitable were you, but were you willing to do any business in my name while I was gone? If it had been me, I would have said, look, I'll sell whatever you want me to sell every other Wednesday between 10 and 10:15. I'm going to be kind of hard to find because I don't want people to know that I have allegiance to you as a king. It's a detriment to me personally to be tied to you as the king. And the king comes back and says, how much business was done in my name? And he comes back and he starts to take inventory of what the servants have done while he was away. And you keep going, verse 16. The first one came and said, sir, your mina has earned 10 more. So I gave you this one, bit, and you earned 10 more with it. Verse 17, what does he say? Well done, my good servant. His master replied, because you have been what? What's the word? Trustworthy in a very small matter, I want you to take charge of 10 cities. To which the servant would think, I don't even know if I want to take charge of 10 cities. But this is essentially, I have entrusted you with something very small. You were faithful with it. You were trustworthy with it. Notice he does not say, because you were profitable. Notice he doesn't say, because you were successful. He says, because you were willing to do business in my name, because you were trustworthy, because you pledged allegiance to me, I am going to entrust to you. And I don't even understand what all this means, but here's sort of the point of this principle, or what Jesus is saying. God is wanting to entrust something to you and to me in the future. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is. But something about how faithful you are with what has been entrusted to you currently Not just in terms of money, but in terms of opportunities in front of you, in terms of raising your kids, in terms of your job, whatever it is. How faithful you are with what has been entrusted to you in the present has some bearing on what gets entrusted to you and to me in the future. And here's the principle. God is like a venture capitalist. And all across this room, he has entrusted various resources. For some of us, he is imparted to you a high IQ. To others of us, he's imparted a high EQ. To others of us, he's given both. Some of you are incredibly good at math, which is odd because we all know that math comes from the devil. But he's given gifts. All across this room, he has imparted gifts. He's made some of you very exact in your decision making. He's given others of you the ability to speak eloquently. He's given others of you communication skills. He's given all across this room. Some of you, you would describe your life in terms of, you know what, I just feel really fortunate to insert your story here. Others of you have described your story this way. You know, in my business, in my life, whatever it was, I was at the right place at the right time. And we talk about those things as if it's just coincidental, or I was just really blessed, or I happen to have this kind of random talent in this particular area. All of those are moments where God has handed a particular mina to you. He's entrusted something to you. He's a venture capitalist, and he's going to return and say, excuse me, Jared, what did you do? Not were you successful, but were you faithful with what I gave to you? Were you faithful with what was entrusted to you for your life? And the hard part is that at some moment in your life, at some moment in your faith journey, it's probably happened already, you are going to feel as if your personal success and your faithfulness to God are in opposition to each other. You probably feel that tension right now. That in some moment or some place in your life, your personal success and your faithfulness to God, they're not congruent. They seem to be opposed to one another. It might be that moment, and what you do in those moments, that is where your faith either goes to thrive or where it goes to die. It could be when you went off to college and in high school you were going, I'm going to be faithful to God. You grew up in church. You grew up in young life. I'm going to be faithful to God. I'm going to be faithful to God. I'm going to be faithful to God. And then you went to college and at your particular university, at your particular fraternity, to be faithful to God seemed like a detriment to your personal success. It seemed like it would cost you friends. It seemed like it would cost you the ability to get into certain networks that you wanted in. And so you began to think, I'm going to compromise on my faithfulness to God in hopes that I can gain in my personal success. And we do this all the time, don't we? It might be the first time you got a paycheck. And when you were a kid, you kind of live with that sense. Maybe your parents had imparted that to you, that God has entrusted you with money, maybe from the drive-through window or mowing yards. And your parents modeled for you. You need to return to God what's been entrusted to you. But when you got your first job or your first paycheck, that all kind of went out the window, didn't it? And you thought, wait a second, when you looked at the size of the first apartment you could get, when you looked at how nice the first car you could buy was, you thought, I'm going to compromise on my faithfulness to God because I want to elevate my personal success. It might be currently in your business, and you feel that tension as a husband. You feel like, how in the world can I be the kind of husband, the kind of father who's the kind of man I need to be, and how at the same time can I be the kind of businessman that I need to be? They seem like they're opposed. And there's that constant tension between your faithfulness to God with what's been entrusted to you and your personal success. And there's that tendency to compromise on our faithfulness to God in hopes that we're going to gain in personal success. There's just that constant thing. In fact, if you're anything like me, most of our prayers are on the personal success side, aren't they? Most of our prayers are going, God, come on, entrust 10 cities to me. Give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more. And the whole time I think God's in heaven going, I want to, and I know you're really interested in that, but Jared, let me tell you what I'm really interested in. Are you going to be faithful with what currently has been entrusted to you, where you are with what has been given to you? And if we're really honest, if you're anything like me, we get angry at God. The angriest we ever get is when we feel like God's holding out on us and he's not giving us what we want. And the whole time when you read this story, God's in heaven going, I want to do that, but I'm interested in, are you going to give me what I want? Because as your master, I want you to be faithful to me, even when it feels or seems like there's going to be a cost to your personal success. And the beauty of this parable, or the beauty of the story, is that it doesn't cost you in terms of personal success. That you gain when you are faithful with what's been entrusted to you. There's something, and I don't even know what it is, and you don't know what it is. Something unleashes, something allows God to entrust something else to you in the future. There's something God wants to entrust to you. You don't know what it is, and I don't know what it is either. But how faithful you are with what's been entrusted to you currently determines if God entrusts something else to you in the future. You keep going in this story, and it says his master, the master asks again the second time. Someone comes to him and said, "Sir, your mina has earned 5 more." So the first guy 10, this guy 5 more. And his master answered. Notice what he says. He doesn't say, "Why weren't you as successful as the other guy?" No, he rewards the faithfulness of this particular servant. And he says, "You take charge of 5 cities." So he's rewarding in direct proportion to the faithfulness of the masters or of the servants. And then another servant came and said, "Sir, here is your mina." I love this guy. Verse 20. This other servant comes to him and says, "Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. I wrapped it in a handkerchief and I put it under the bed," okay? "I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in, and you reap what you did not sow." I love this third guy, because this third guy, he was entrusted with some mina by the master. These are from Chuck E. Cheese, okay, so nobody get too excited. But he was entrusted with some mina by the master, and he watched the other guy who takes it and said, "You know what, it's gonna be difficult, but I'm going to go and do the master's work. I'm gonna be faithful to the master because I think he's gonna return." And the second guy said, "You know what, it's gonna cost me personally. People are gonna criticize me. People are gonna question why I'm doing this, but I'm gonna be faithful to the master because I think he's going to return. And I don't know what he's gonna do when he gets back." And the third guy essentially says, "I'll just take my chances that he's not coming back. I'm just gonna store this away and kind of let the dust settle on this thing and see if he even makes it back." And the master returns and says, "What did you do with the mina that I gave to you?" And he says, "Good news, bad news, boss. Bad news, no ROI, significant for you. Good news, I got your mina right here." And the master is looking at him in this moment going, "Oh, you did no business in my name, did you? You were not faithful to me," maybe because you were embarrassed. "You were not faithful to me with what was entrusted to you because you thought you could just store that away and it was just for you later. But I'm telling you, you thought and he's essentially looking back at the master. He's going, "I thought you had no intention of ever returning. I thought you had no intention of keeping me accountable for what was entrusted to me in my life. I just thought I could use it for my own benefit maybe later when I found out that you weren't king." And he insults him, doesn't he? And he says, "I never thought you were the king to begin with. I thought you reaped what you did not sow." In other words, I thought you were a thief. And I never thought you were going to return. I never thought you were going to come back. I never thought you were going to keep me accountable for what had been entrusted to me." And so the master says to this particular guy, and Jesus is describing what his kingdom is like and what kind of king he ultimately is. And his master replied, "I will judge you by your own words." In other words, you wicked servant, you have a distorted view of who I am. You thought this whole time I was not a king. You thought this whole time I was not going to keep you accountable. You just kind of took the things that were given to you and thought, "Well, good for me. I've got these minas. I'll kind of wrap them in a handkerchief and hold on to them." He's going, "You did not understand my intention, and you did not understand the kind of king I am." And he goes on, "You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow?" In other words, you were so arrogant to assume that I was not going to return. You thought I was a thief, not a king. Why then didn't you put my money on deposit? In other words, he's kind of calling him out on his lie here, so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest. Then he said to those standing by, take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. I'm not going to entrust him with anything else because he was not faithful with what was entrusted to him in the first place. And I don't know what it all means. I don't understand the implications of all this, but here's what I know and here's what I believe. There is something that God wants to entrust to you in the future. And it depends on how faithful you are with what's currently been entrusted to you. What gets entrusted to you and me in the future, it depends on what you do with what has currently been entrusted to you. So the question, I just have one question. Are you faithful with what God's entrusted to you? Are you being faithful with what God's entrusted? Maybe it's a job that's in front of you. And if you're anything like me, when it comes to job, when it comes to career, I mean, we have this tendency to look at the success side of it. It's our culture. It's how we're wired. And we go, God, would you make this more successful? Would you make this bigger? Would you expand this division? Would you grow the business? I mean, we look at the success side of it. And the whole time God's going, whoa, whether it's the drive-through window, whether it's a division at your particular company, whether it's your small business, I am asking for you to be faithful with what you currently have, where you currently are. I don't want anybody in your division to question who your allegiance is ultimately to. Are you faithful with what has been entrusted to you currently? And something about what's next is dependent on how faithful you are with what you currently have. Maybe it's as a mom, you find yourself all the time feeling that tension between success at work and raising kids, success at work and raising kids. Or maybe even as a dad, you feel that pressure, that tension. And the problem is, as a mom, you probably don't feel that successful, do you? And God, in this particular season, at this particular stage of your life, he has entrusted to you some sons, some daughters for you to raise in this particular season of your life. And he's going, I want you to be fully present. I want you to be as faithful as you can with what I have entrusted to you for this season. And your greatest contribution to the kingdom may not be something you do. It may just be somebody you raise. I want you to be faithful with what I have entrusted to you for this season. And something about your future, something about mine, is dependent on how well we perform the assignment that is currently in front of us. What has God entrusted to you in this season, this stage of your life? For all of us, he's entrusted a certain amount of resources, hasn't he? It's not equitable across this room, but depending on your career, your job, stage of life, God has entrusted some mina to you, some resources, some finances. And he's going, whoa, you thought that all came from you, Jared? You thought that came from your abilities and your talents? I have entrusted it to you. Are you going to be faithful with what has been entrusted to you? Here's what I know about Jesus. He said on a hillside 2,000 years ago to 12 of his disciples, here's the plan, guys. I am going to build my church, and the gates of hell are not going to overcome it. And my church is going to advance into the world. In Jerusalem, it's going to begin. It's going to go up to the Roman Empire. It's going to find its way to San Diego. And I want you to build my church. I want you to be the hands and the feet of Jesus alongside of the Spirit of God building my church, because I want faith to be passed on to the next generation. I want mouths to be fed. I want homes to be built. I am interested in the church. And with our money, with our time, with our energy, he's going, I want you to be a part of it. And how often, if we're honest, we're looking back at Jesus and we're going, I'll just take my chances, because I don't think you're going to return, and I don't think you take it that serious anyway. And he's going, come on, I'm the master. I have entrusted something to you, and I want you to be faithful to what has been entrusted to you. And something, and I don't even know what it all means, about your future, about mine, depends on how faithful we are with what's been entrusted to us now. We're going to take the elements of communion together today. And here's the reason why. Because God has taken an enormous risk. He invites every single one of us to take an enormous risk. The opposite of our faith is not failure. It's fear, being too afraid to do the thing that God has asked us to do. It's not failing. It's that we would be too afraid to do the thing that God's asking us to do, or to have the courage to take the step that he wants us to take. And the reason why we worship our Savior is because what has God done? He has taken an enormous risk, and he has taken an enormous divine gamble by placing his Spirit inside each and every one of you. That was his plan for building his kingdom in this world. He says, it's you guys. And there's no plan B, that's plan A. And he has given his Spirit. Think about this. He has imparted his Spirit to you, that every room you walk into, every morning meeting you walk into, every bar you walk into, anywhere you go, you carry and you contain the Spirit of God. It has been entrusted to you. And when we take the elements of communion into our bodies, it is a reminder of the Spirit of God, that he has not left this earth, but he has imparted to us his mission, and he works alongside of us. But the Spirit of God is inside of you. He has entrusted that to you. From the left side of your aisle, if you can't stand for some particular reason, just raise your hands and or raise a hand. You don't have to raise both, but raise a hand and someone will bring the elements to you. Ushers, would you come at this time? And DJ is going to come and lead us, and we're going to take the elements of communion together. And as you do, would you reflect on a gracious God who's entrusted so much to you, and he's entrusted his Spirit into your bones and into your soul.